We're here outside of Camp Alphaville, and I have Carson Block, founder of Muddy Waters Research. We've just finished our extremely jet-lagged China panel, and Carson, you're kind of significantly more bearish than a lot of the panel, have far less faith that China can avoid a crash in the near term. Maybe you take us through why that is.
Sure. Well, the issue that I see is that China has already destroyed so much capital historically through wasted investments in fixed asset. So that's a tremendous overhang. That, I mean, once that capital, and of course there's been a cost for that. There's borrowing, and so when China, or when Chinese deployers of capital have borrowed money and then sunk it into real estate investments that are never going to earn more than the cost of capital, or other capital projects, adding manufacturing capacity where there already is excess capacity, that's just not going to repay the debt. So essentially, this will be a significant overhang. And at some point, these chickens have to come home to roost. So in my view, you will have to see a sharp downward trend in GDP until you can actually start to see an upward trend again, just because of this overhang. When that happens, or when that begins, that adjustment process, that's impossible to say. Could be beginning now. They do try to kick the can down the road. Every time, and this has been a trend since 2010, the leadership, when it looks into the abyss and, after it raises reserve requirements or does something to tighten up, it loses its nerve. And I think we see this leadership once again doing that.
Is this what we're seeing with the mini stimulus, an attempt to prop up property prices, asset prices in the near term?
Yes. I mean, and look, the Chinese, I'm very critical of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not a fan of this regime, but in this regard, they are no different than any other government in the world. They do not, every time they feel that pressure because the economy is really starting that downturn, they try to postpone this as much as possible.
So what do you think of the rebalancing thesis? This idea that China will manage to transition to a different economic structure. And what do you make of President Xi's maneuvers, this consolidation of power in the center?
Sure. Well, we've been hearing about rebalancing for a number of years, okay? And, one of the things that I think is telling, by rebalancing we mean increasing, or economists generally mean increasing household consumption as a percentage of GDP. But, rather than this fixation of, here's GDP, it's going to grow like this, how do we bring household consumption up at a faster rate? I think household consumption, which has grown at 7 to 8% over the past decade, I think that's telling you how much waste there really is in the GDP number. In other words, how much of an asset bubble there is. So if you consider this household consumption to be kind of a good number, this is your base. And at the beginning of the 2000s, it was about 45% of GDP. It's presently under 35%. Well, if you were to say, okay, this number is the good number, let's assume that it is still 45% of non-excess waste GDP. Well, that implies that, the GDP minus these excess waste fixed asset investments should be about 25% lower than it is presently.
Which is a pretty grim scenario.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't scientific, but I think that household consumption number is a better number because household consumption is a function of household incomes. And now where I and some of the other panelists diverge is that, the conventional view is, well, household incomes are low because the corporate sector keeps too much of the profits. But really, household income is also a function of labor productivity, which is also a function in part of education. And this is where it becomes really a generational change type issue for China. The education system in China has been geared to serve the Communist Party. So in general, the education system does not imbue people with critical thinking skills. So to really reach that next level of, they marshaled the resources, they were able to manufacture. To reach that next level of the service economy, the education must improve, and that will take a while.
Okay, thanks very much, Carson. If you want to see more, go to ft.com/Alphaville.